All right. Great discussion, guys. So, look, one thing that's really been troubling me, like we've been talking about death, a lot about tech, right? And I like tech. I'm not a Ciaran level tech guy, as we've discovered on many occasions. I'm often educated about things that I really wish I hadn't heard about by Ciaran, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. What? But one thing I'm worried about, one thing I am is a pretty social person. Like I love to hang out with people, I love to meet people. Business is about trust. It's about building trust with individuals. And I'm still of the view, even though we spent an hour talking over whatever forum this is in on tech, we know each other very well, right? We've known each other for a number of years. We work together, we hang out with each other, we go to dinner with each other when we're allowed to do that. I do wonder that, and Rob Stokes said this when he came on my podcast, Smarter Cities, subscribe, just for the record, that we might be running out of steam. We might be running on fumes. That maybe business is becoming harder and harder to do via technology, and maybe we're running to an overuse of technology. And there's two reflections I can make on that. The first is I read an article today that said Google is thinking about cutting pay for people that only work from home because they're worried about this fumes thing. We're running on fumes. And also, if you look at the markets, there's a lot of trading activity going in the markets, but it's largely people buying existing stuff. One company buying a completed asset from another company, and development is sort of a really hard thing to do in an environment of lockdown. At least that's my perspective. Am I right? Are we getting to a point of overuse of technology, or in fact, am I just a dinosaur? And in fact, we can work on this from now on. Ciaran Hennessy.
So I think there's 2 points to this, right? So I'm going to aggressively agree with you that.
That's the second time you've aggressively agreed with something,
I know.
Right?
I'm in aggressive agreement today. I think creative pursuits are hard to do virtually, right? And when you think about, the process of development, the process of creation, the process of, innovation, for want of a better word, it's hard to do virtually because it's a process of sort of feeding off other people and feeding off ideas and feeding off the moment in time, right? A lot of great creative sort of things are all about the moment in time, right? The place, the people, like all the sort of things that were around that. And I think what's becoming very clear is work from home and virtual is really good if you are if you're a task worker, right? So if you're sort of doing the same things, like you're doing a whole lot of activities, I mean, it's perfect for software developers, right? So they have a whole series of things. They understand the context of what they're doing. It's just about churning out the work, right?
So when you say just so let's be clear on this, a task worker is somebody who has a particular thing they have to do and they are solely responsible for that thing. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. Things to do, right? Activities. And I think the part of the businesses that are really struggling is this, and it used to be called the knowledge worker, right? So people whose job it is to, connect other people together, to, inject sort of, energy into ideas, to sort of promote, divergent thinking, to sort of push the boundaries of those things. Because to your point, Jason, I think that's really about this sort of the deal between two people in the real world, right? And it comes down to a handshake. It's about this sort of this unspoken contract between people. I think that is suffering a lot under the realm of digital. On the other hand, and so this is based on, sort of how I've been watching my children who are, 15 and 12 respectively, sort of survive during this lockdown as well, as I think there's a different type of social sort of environment that's really aggressively grown quickly during this as well. And, you're looking at, like my 12-year-old spends a lot of time on Fortnite, right? But when I listen to the conversations that he has with his friends whilst he's playing the game, it's sort of half about the game and then half about just reconnecting with those friendships, right?
Yeah.
And I think this generation that's sort of most affected by this lockdown are creating coping mechanisms by building different types of social connections and different types of relationships through the world of digital. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that percolates through businesses in the next couple of, the next decade or so, because, these will be people who, you know, through no fault of their own, are being forced into these new ways of thinking and these new ways of connecting together. And I know a lot of people sort of thought that, you know, prior to the pandemic, it was, you know, everybody's always on their phone texting each other. It's all about Facebook or what everything. But I think it's really amplified the survival instinct, particularly of teenagers, to connect with each other over digital. And, you know, those sort of things they're learning, you know, through some of the things in online schooling. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how, you know, those real creative sort of, you know, how do you bring people together skills and this new sort of method that the next generation are putting together will make a change.
It's interesting, you know, my 8-year-old, my oldest 7-year-old, she's almost 8. They have they've got a chat function on their Google Classroom, and they really are sharing messages with one another. So she's really learning to type now. Like her typing skills are really improving because they're chatting to each other. The teacher can see everything that they're saying, so there's no like sort of side chat room or anything like that. And they're largely sharing information about what they're thinking. Or, you know, it's all very sort of childish stuff, but and it should be. They're children. I can see that for teenagers. I do think for kindergarten and for year twos, where my clowns are up to, it's hard work for them because they're looking at slides all day and they're finding it boring. And they, you know, at those ages, it's about being with one another and doing kind of fun things, right? Whereas I do agree when you get to the older ages, and Michelle, your kids are older. It'd be interested in your view on this as well. I can think they can maintain that social relationship via digital a bit easier. Is that your view? I mean, how are your kids coping?
I mean, my kids, they're 14, 17, and my eldest is about to turn 19 on the 27th of this month.
Wow.
And I guess twofold. I mean, from an education perspective, where the teachers have been able to really accelerate their skills into the digital realm, they have just thrived because they've been able to just focus and do their thing. Olivia's about to do her Year 12 exams, which you know, so from a social perspective, less kind of worried about social. It's about how does she perform, and we're having some really fascinating conversations around, well, do exams actually teach you anything? You know, what should be the university structure moving forward? And I think that there's going to be a whole new expectation of the way that education is delivered and offered as offered to students moving forward. I think from a social perspective, my youngest, my little Miss 14, loves gaming, and so she's got little groups happening in Twitch and all sorts of things, and they kind of go, right, let's get through schoolwork and let's meet our objectives, and then we're going to go hang out in Twitch and we're going to go and compete and see and comment on different gamers doing their thing.
So is there sorry, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
My 17-year-old, again, he's got Fortnite, but it's interspersed between the parts I hate and then sort of comments when the mums get involved to go, whoa, you guys are out, and just a respectful banter to say, yeah, okay, Mrs. D, it's time to get off.
So and then that's it. Let me pick up on that. Let me pick up on that bit, right? Because my kids are younger than yours, right? So
yeah.
And we're not at that phase yet where it's anything beyond very simple stuff. How do you manage your concern that they might end up in the wrong places on the internet or in the wrong conversations? Or, you know, you mentioned there, you know, Mrs. D gets involved and say, all right, boys, that's enough. Or like, how do you prevent a predator getting involved when your kids are online all the time? And this isn't just about the pandemic. We're moving more into what the costs of connectivity are versus just the obvious benefits of it. You're a mum, Michelle. Tell us about it.
Transparency. My philosophy was always, hey, you know, if you're in Vegas, right, and you're going in a bus and someone says, well, don't go down that naughty street, your kids are going to go down that street because they want to see what it's all about. But if you drive us down that naughty street and then you teach them and you showcase where the dangers are and where the opportunities to have fun are, they're going to go, okay, well, I'm going to avoid that section, but I'm going to embrace that section. And so that's my philosophy in terms of parenting with them. It's been, I have to show them the way. And if they're getting involved in Twitch, guess what? I've got to learn what Twitch is. And it's great for me because I like, it's game advertising is the future of marketing, so get involved. But also it allows me to kind of continue that kind of close relationship where I'm learning with them, and they trust me, and they'll say to me, I remember Olivia, my 19-year-old, coming to me because she was watching Dora the Explorer on YouTube, and in the middle of Dora, some lovely person decided to pull in the armed guns and shoot down Dora and her happy little monkey. And it was gruesome, but because I've always kind of been there with them and I've shown them the way, they were quite comfortable to come to me, and she was able to say, "Mum, I don't like this. What's happened?" And so it's that kind of trust where they're going to be there. I mean, Miss 19 jokes that our new language of love is TikTok sharing, and we share a lot of TikToks together. That's how we say I love you. But
you sound like a very digitally aware family, though, right? You guys sound like you're really with all the different applications. Do you think that is a broad understanding in the community for parents about how to communicate with children?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I don't think so.
And yeah.
And look, and in the danger of this turning into a parenting podcast,
this is autonomous backstage. It could be anything it wants it to be.
Oh, it's a good point. I think it's really important to treat children like the adults that they're going to turn into, right? And if you don't help your children make good decisions, it's hard for them to be adults, right? I mean, like if they're constantly covered in cotton wool and never exposed to anything at all, like how are they going to work out what's right and what's wrong and what they should do and what they shouldn't do, right? Feedback is a great learning activity, right? Don't touch that thing, it's sharp. Don't touch that thing, it's hot. Don't go on the edge of that, you might fall over, right? Like and it's sort of the same with the digital realm as well, right? I mean, I agree with Michelle, like there's no point in, look, okay, I'm going to give a caveat. There are some things that your children should never see, right? And I have a whole lot of things in place which stop those things from digitally entering my house. However, you need your kids to sort of be able to make a decision about whether they can handle that stuff, because if you let them make that decision, they'll come to you when they're feeling uncomfortable, right? And I mean, my 15-year-old daughter does come quite often to me, and she's going, is this person who's sending me all these messages, I'm going to block them. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. And so, as you sort of see
she's
them
clearly been educated in what's dangerous and
right.
And what isn't.
You want your kids to have good decisions reinforced and bad decisions supported out of, right? And I know that sounds weird, but when they make bad decisions, you sort of got to show them how to get to a good decision. And so if you're constantly sort of shielding them from everything that's going to cause them slight harm, like you should always shield your children from major harm, right? But there are some things which are learning points in your life. And I think it's really important for people to experience those, because if they don't, they grow up into adults that can't do anything.
You make a good point, right? I mean, I reflect on my own upbringing in Hong Kong. We had a lot of latitude, a lot of freedom, and my parents were very clear about, you can do what you like, but just be responsible and sensible, right, about what you're going to do. And because of that treatment as an adult, I, fortunately didn't do anything too stupid, right? So now that you can look back and say, well, hey, there's things I did stupidly. You can laugh about them, right?
Yeah.
Because they were not too over the top. The digital world, however, is one where I think there were just so many doors you could potentially go through and open that as parents, you have to be more, I think probably more alert than before, and more adult and responsible in your own mind. I mean, I'm a parent of three kids. I forgot my son. Poor guy. Sorry, Joshy. but
Poor Joshy.
I support Joshy. I reflect on myself and I think, my God, am I responsible enough to handle this? Because it is apparent, it's kind of frightening.
And look,
But we had some interns. Oh, sorry.
That's all
No,
right.
you go, Michelle.
Say,
Oh, sorry.
well, let me do
um,
my interesting metaphor, right? The internet's really like the ocean, right? It's big and it's scary and there's a lot of things in there that you don't want to see. But if you learn to swim, you can avoid the majority of those dangers, right? And teaching children digital literacy is like teaching people to swim in the ocean.
That's a great metaphor. That's a great metaphor. I like that.
Anyway,
Michelle, sorry, we
can't
interrupted
compete
you.
with that metaphor, and now I look really bad. But it is a good metaphor. But we had some grads come in, or students who were studying at one of the universities in Sydney, and they had an assignment to work on something relating to autonomous. And they really showed that, hey, one, they'd been educated on how to use digital and in a way that was productive. But then they really argued with us the importance of creating an environment where people can opt in and opt out. So, hey, this is my data. This is my experience. So I get to choose what path I go down or what laneway I go down. And it's up to big business to actually create a safe environment that allows you to have that choice and have that option. And I think that the more we give kids the literacy on digital, the more they're going to be just these amazing kids that are going through university, really setting the standard and setting the bar in how industry needs to behave, and hopefully making some really great decisions for us when they take over as the future prime ministers and presidents of this world, because they're going to understand the importance of both digital literacy, privacy, as well as the importance of personal protection and personal safety.
What's digital? Let's just investigate this digital literacy concept for a second, because I think it's kind of cool, right? So when I think of digital literacy, is that the capacity to be a person in a workplace who's able to use the internet, use different applications, use applications on your phone, and be a good productive citizen? Or is it a real understanding of the power of social media for good or evil?
I think there's a tip in the word literacy, right? Because when you sort of think about, there are people who can read and there are people who are literate, right? And it's about how do you take the meaning or the concepts or like the outcomes out of it, right? And just understanding how to use digital technologies isn't really digital literacy. That's just competency. And like, it's being able to use those skills. I mean, there's this great saying that you hear quite a lot when people talk about, the evolution of offices, which is this whole thing of work is not a place. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about when you think about digital literacy, because it's where you can use digital to, enhance your life, right? Or add meaning or add value. And, one of the things we were talking about in our 2019 conversation we had was this whole, the ultimate sort of benefit of people becoming very digitally literate is to remove the monotonous tasks from their life, right?
The checking thing, I remember that.
The checking things, right? You're checking this, checking that, doing those things, right? I think I said that last time.
You did.
Like when you sort of bring that in, it's sort of adding that extra sort of element to your life. Like if you sort of think about really literate people, right? They can go, talk about this quote. I can talk about this meaning that I pulled out of this book. Like there's this, fundamental sort of, like joy that I got out of watching a movie, right? So it's that literacy part, right? It's squeezing the value out of this digital sort of world that we're in, which I think is the real key about digital literacy, is like, how do you find the value?
Michelle, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's understanding the digital world in context. So when I watch my kids, they know, hey, I'm going to use Symbol or WhatsApp or whatever it is to kind of share stories. I'm going to express myself creatively with Instagram. They're on Facebook, but only because apparently me. And
isn't it? I thought Facebook was a middle-aged person's device now.
Yeah,
The app.
it is. TikTok is where they go to kind of, as I said, their language of love, sending me things that are going to make me cry with laughter. And so I think it's just navigating, hey, when do I use different platforms where, and what
That's
value is that
definitely
going
the
to
case,
deliver? Yeah,
You know,
and then
people
also
use
then
WhatsApp. People use WhatsApp for one thing. People will use Signal for another thing. People will use Facebook Messenger for something else. I think you're absolutely right on
it's
that
also
point.
to kind of go, here's where I use it, but then here are also the risks. So, hey, these particular environments might attract more pedophiles than others. Be careful of that here, or ideally avoid those areas. Here are the potential risks of being, fished or spammed or where fraud could happen. So it's kind of understanding, it's bringing together kind of the social application with the security and cyber risks, and bringing that all together in a way that allows them to make decisions. It allows them to keep themselves safe, or if they recognize where they're not feeling safe, recognize those warning signs to say, I'm going to trust that gut instinct. I don't feel safe. I'm going to go and get my parent. I'm going to go
The recognition thing. There you go. See, I'm holding a child's pen while having this conversation. Look at this. But yeah, I mean, I think the recognition thing is key, right? Is the ability of children to be able to trust and say to their parents, "Hey, I don't feel something doesn't feel right here, mum or dad." And that's certainly with our kids what we're trying to do. So there's nothing secret, nothing off limits. You just tell us whatever you want. You're not going to get in trouble. And I think most parents are starting to learn that task. But I think this is difficult for this group. I mean, we are a highly digital literate. I call myself less literate than you two, but mostly understanding what we're doing here. And a lot of the audience that listens to my podcast, this podcast, are probably in the same category. But I think there is a lot of work we're going to do in schools. I think there's a lot of work we're going to do in public policy and regulation around these issues that I fear the pandemic has kind of pushed aside. The focus has all been on pandemic and not enough on these social issues. And this is a social issue. How do we deal with the safeguards and the safety elements of rapidly emerging new communication tools, new ways of treating with each other, new ways of doing business. And you mentioned their big business. I completely agree. If business has a role in driving innovation in the space race, then it definitely has a role in making sure that as individuals and as families and as communities, we're safe online.
But also, I think it's knowing when to use those digital tools, but also when the power of contact, with face-to-face experiences matter. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't plug Autonomous. Shamara and Michael talk about where they've used data to actually see where people thrive when they're together in a room, and they can have that ability to bounce off each other. And as someone who's both creative and scientific, nothing makes me happier than when I'm in a room with my team or with my colleagues, and we can actually bounce ideas off each other, and that energy goes through the room.
That's because your team is hyperactive.
Yeah, right? We are.
It's like I find it exhausting hanging out with you guys, right? So, oh my God, I'm going to hang out with them again.
But we always get you. We always get you in.
You do. Well, it's a good segue then to diversity, right? Which is something I know, Michelle, you're really keen to talk about.